Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and you're listening to a new episode of Data Nation. And this is a pretty exciting week, especially if you're someone who really follows the open lakehouse Apache Iceberg world that I do, and are super excited by open source the way that I am, in the sense that basically there's been a couple of catalyst moments for the Apache Iceberg space. Okay, and in large part, one of the big catalysts that allowed people to sort of just become aware and excited about Apache Iceberg was when Snowflake decided to adopt Apache Iceberg as a format it would use. Most people, or a good amount of people, just didn't know what Apache Iceberg was at the time. I know, being someone who spends literally his full-time job advocating and helping educate people about Apache Iceberg, I was going from event to event and basically helping make people aware of it one by one. And then one day Snowflake says, hey, we're going to adopt Apache Iceberg. And suddenly, that certainly accelerated things. And another thing that I've spent a lot of time advocating for is open source catalogs, particularly like Nessie, which is, again, a data catalog that is open source, which means you can self-manage it. That allows you to have sort of like Git-like abilities with your data. So you can like branch your catalog, do tags, all these great functionalities. And there's some great benefits to open source catalogs, because when you have an open source catalog, you could manage it yourself if you want to. Okay, so for example, with Nessie, you don't have to manage it yourself. You can get a cloud managed version of Nessie through Dremio. But what happens if one day you don't want that, or you want to move to a different, you don't want that particular version? You can always just basically move to a self-hosted version, so you're not locked in anywhere. And that's the beauty of open source. With Apache Iceberg being sort of a universal format, you can use whatever tool you want for compute. And with an open source catalog, it makes it really easy to transport that and not be stuck within any particular vendor's ecosystem. So, but again, something that I've gone from, conference to conference talking about, but it's a process. And this week is a huge acceleration for that process, because Snowflake has decided to release their own open source catalog, their own foray into the space called Polaris, which is great because this has created a huge acceleration of the conversation of the value of open source catalogs. So whether it's Nessie, whether it's Polaris, and there's another one called Gravitino, those are sort of the three main open source implementations of a catalog. Okay, and I use that word implementation very intentionally because there's also an open source specification. So there's something called the REST catalog specification, which I've talked about in previous episodes of the podcast. But that's not a catalog in itself, but essentially a interface in which catalogs can use to talk with tools. So the idea is that usually what happened is that each catalog kind of came up with its sort of own way of doing things, and they would have to sort of write a Java library, so that way Java-based tools that use the Apache Iceberg API would be able to talk to that catalog. But then as Apache Iceberg expanded into other languages, so then you have PyIceberg, well then all those libraries for each catalog had to be rewritten again in Python. And now that this would be a Go and Rust Iceberg library, theoretically they would have to be rewritten again. So the solution was, well, instead of making the server or like the client library, so like basically depend on having the logic written in that particular language, the idea was, how about we have all the logic for how the catalog works done on the server, okay? And the server implements that in whatever language it likes. And then the way that the particular language library talks to it, so whether it's Python, Rust, Go, Rust, Go, Java, etc., the way that it communicates with it is through HTTP calls, okay, sort of the universal language for systems talking to each other. When you think about it, it's how the internet works. When we do REST calls or HTTP calls to any web server out there, it doesn't matter what language that web server is out there, the HTTP specification allows them to communicate. So the REST specification is a specification for how you design sort of the different endpoints of a server. So that way they're uniform. So basically every catalog, the server, while how the actual server works is different from catalog to catalog, the specific access points are the same. So in that case, you only need one library for each language, and then all catalogs can use that library as long as they follow the specification. So this allows there to be a variety of catalogs, and even in-house catalogs, because you have companies like Netflix that instead of using one of these catalog options that exist or vendors, they built their own in-house catalog. And I always forget the name of it off the top of my head, but they have like their own in-house catalog. So theoretically, they would have to go build a Python library, a Java library, a Go library, but they don't have to if they adopt the REST spec, which I'm pretty sure they did. So in that case, they would just be able to piggyback off that existing library, making it easier to have that in-house catalog that's built internally. Okay, it allows vendors, like Tabular, who built a enterprise catalog as a vendor, they can use it. Basically, open source catalogs like Nessie, Polaris, and Gravitino, they can use it, and it makes it where they just kind of get grandfathered into all tools. So it's like they don't have to go from engine to engine and say, hey, can you create a feature to connect to my catalog for using Iceberg tables? They can just say, hey, we adopted the REST catalog, and any tool that supports that ability to connect via that interface just works. So that's pretty awesome. So basically, with these open source catalogs, one, you're creating a groundswell of open source options for using that REST catalog specification, but you're also creating an avenue to avoid vendor lock-in. So it's a pretty exciting time. Okay, I mean, I can definitely see the increase of awareness and interest in this whole open source catalog idea. And again, there's a lot of reasons why you want to have that flexibility, because what if you use a vendor for your catalog, but suddenly that vendor gets required? You don't have to go shift to a whole new type of catalog and have to sort of rethink how you do your security and how you do all sorts of different things. You want to have something where you can just port over what you're doing over to an open source implementation and just kind of move on with life in a situation like that. So overall, pretty exciting. Again, Polaris is not immediately available. Basically, the full sort of like implementation will be, or the open source repository where people can use will be available within, I think they said 90 days. So look out for that. And there's some other really probably cool announcements they'll make throughout the week here at Snowflake Summit. If you actually happen to be at Snowflake Summit, I will be in the area on June 5th, which is tomorrow. And I will be at an event that Dremio is doing across the street from the Moscone Center, where the event is being held, in the Children's Museum that's across the street. And there we'll be doing a Dremio Chill Lounge. We'll be having talks and refreshments and just a space where people can come relax if they just want to kind of step out for a little bit. So check me out there. Again, this is Alex Merced. You're listening to Data Nation. I hope you have a great day. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already and share it with your friends. Exciting times. I'll see you all later.